The ER-2 is a high-altitude research platform that NASA has stationed here at the Dryden Flight Research Center in California. The main characteristic of the airplane is its ability to fly at or above altitudes of 70,000 feet, or to put it another way, in the upper 5% of the Earth's atmosphere. The advantages of an aircraft that can fly that high is it can take a scientific experiment and can fly to altitudes that other airplanes can't get to collect data. The downside of flying at those altitudes is that the pilot in an emergency situation is placed in a hostile environment, because at 70,000 feet, although the plane itself is not in space, from a physiological standpoint, the pilot's body is, if it was exposed to the outside environment without a full pressure suit. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about the full pressure suit, some do's and don'ts associated with working and responding to that suit in an emergency situation, and give you some ideas and suggestions on how to get the pilot out of the aircraft in an emergency situation. What you see here is the suit, and I have it inflated and hanging against the wall there, just to give you an idea of the shape of the suit, basically nothing else. We're going to be putting a volunteer in the suit a little bit later when we go in the aircraft to give you a better idea of what you're going to be confronting when you go out there. Basically, the suit is a human-shaped balloon. You're going to see some panels like right here. That's going to be on the far side of the cockpit in an emergency situation. That's where the air conditioning is going to go in. You'll see that when it goes into when you're actually out in the airplane. The communications cord, which is right here, is also going to be hooked up on the far side, which will not really be visible. And then there's also going to be a set of hoses down here on the right thigh, which again you'll see in the airplane. Those assemblies that in an emergency situation, when you start pulling handles in the aircraft, they do not disconnect. But all those assemblies are on a 12 to 20 pound breakaway pull. So once I demonstrate in the airplane, once you pull the handles, whatever does not break away automatically will break away when you start egressing the pilot. Okay, the suit you're seeing here is an older version of the full pressure suit than what we're currently using today. But for all intents and purposes, the hookups in the aircraft are identical and the helmet will be the same, just for a point of reference. One thing that I need to point out immediately is that in any emergency situation, do not try to take the helmet off of the suit. If the pilot has any neck injury at all this will do is make it worse. Or if he doesn't have a problem, trying to take the helmet off could create one. The one caveat to that is if there's a situation where you need to get at the throat area, you do have the option, at your discretion, of separating the helmet from the suit if need be. That's a simple matter of pulling up on this tongue and rotating that latch aside, and that will separate to that point. This will allow you to gain access to the throat, but again, this is a last-ditch measure and shouldn't be done unless absolutely necessary. One thing you can do once you get the pilot clear of the airplane is open up the visor to get at the mouth and the nose to check for breathing or to give CPR if required. To open up the visor, pull down on the bar to take tension off the little pin. Pull out on the pin and then simultaneously push the two buttons on the side and then rotate the bar back. This will open the visor, allow you to get at what we call the face cavity of the helmet, and this will allow you to get at the pilot's nose and mouth to be able to give a CPR or to check his respiration and breathing or to check his other vital signs. Another issue which a lot of firefighters have a hard time contending with is once the visor is down and locked, and in an emergency situation, they think once they're pulling the airplane or the pilot from the airplane, that once they connect him or disconnect him from the ship's oxygen supply, the pilot's going to suffocate with the visor down and locked. That's not the case with this helmet. On the side of the helmet right here is an anti-suffocation valve. Once the oxygen flow to the helmet is disrupted, the human body is resilient. It's going to start trying to get air. It's going to start gasping. Once it starts gasping hard enough, a check valve in the side of the helmet here is going to open up and is going to allow the pilot to breathe the outside air. So this will give you time to get the pilot free to a safe area before you have to open up the visor. Now, in most situations, that visor is going to be open because the pilots open that thing up as they come in for a landing. And then they shut off their O2 in the aircraft. If it's an emergency situation, smoke in the cockpit or whatever, and the situation warrants where the visor is down and locked, not only does that offer the protection of staying on oxygen from the smoke or whatnot, but the visor adds extra protection to the face as you're trying to get the pilot free from the aircraft. A couple of things I mentioned earlier, for starters, was some of the breakaway items that will not disconnect when you pull the handles in the airplane. One of them is the air conditioning hose. This hooks into the pilot's suit on the left side and will actually disconnect down at the other end there, the silver end there, as you're egressing the pilot. Again, this is an item that's on the 12 to 20 pound breakaway pull. It's hard to see in the airplane, so I'm showing it to you now just to let you know it's there. The other things that are really important to make note are the oxygen hoses right here. Okay? They're going to be strapped to the right leg, and when you pull the survival kit handle, they will free up and they will come out with the pilot on the right side. And then the last thing over there is the survival kit handle. Right? When you pull that, that actually activates the kit in a manual fashion and will free everything up. The main reason I'm showing these to you is you've already seen the suit and you see the suit's yellow. Well, gee whiz, the oxygen hoses are yellow and that handle on the side of the survival kit's yellow. Once you get in the airplane, you're going to see that the scramble handle in the airplane is also yellow. The ejection handle, which is between the pilot's legs in this airplane, is yellow. Once you look in that cockpit, you're going to be looking into a sea of yellow, and all those handles are going to disappear. That's the reason I'm showing it to you now, so when you look at them in the aircraft, you'll have a good idea of where they're at, because they're not going to be easily spotted, and you're literally going to have to dig to find the ejection handles on this aircraft. Next thing we want to address is the parachute. This parachute's different than most other parachutes because of the size of the canopy. This is a ballistically actuated parachute. Underneath this red cover cap is the equivalent of a shotgun slug, which it takes to deploy the parachute. Now, in an emergency situation, if we have enough time in advance, we will be able to give you this set of pins so you can have these in your possession when you go out to the aircraft. After you cut the ballistic hoses, safety and ejection seat, this would be the first thing you would do if you had these pins, would be to set them. You look at the cutout here, you see the lines running here. You just simply put it over the top till it seats and just rotate it about 1/8 of a turn, locks it in place. That way, if the chute inadvertently fires during any part of the egress process, the cap will absorb the slug, and even though the chute will fire, the parachute will not deploy. This is the parachute arming cable. When you pull the scramble handle, the breech that this is inserted in will drop down. It'll free this cable. The fire crew's responsibility is to reach down and pull this cable from the breech, fraying it. Now, if you pull on this cable and snag it, you have about this much slack before the chute will fire and deploy itself. You'll see that the sides of the cockpit are rounded to keep this thing from snagging. The thing to do would be to take this thing out and stick it in between the pilot and the parachute, taking the whole assembly out of play, because that way it can't snag and it's safely out of the way as you egress the pilot out of the aircraft. The egress system on this aircraft in an emergency is for the parachute to come out on the pilot's back, which means that when egress personnel are actually pulling the pilot out of the airplane, you've got to assume you have between 185 and a 200-pound pilot. The pressure suit that we looked at here earlier today goes between 30 and 40 pounds, depending on what the pilot's carrying. Now you have an extra 45 to 50 pounds of parachute. So your fire crew are going to be looking at pulling out 275 to 300 pounds out of that cockpit when they're pulling the pilot out. So just be aware of the extra weight that's going to be involved with the egress procedures in this aircraft. To gain access to the cockpit, there are two methods. One is use a 1/2-inch drive wrench, put it in the slot there and follow the arrows. That retracts the locking dogs, allows you to open the canopy. If you use a 1/2-inch drive wrench to open up the canopy to retract the locking dogs, you open up the canopy, make sure the locking latch here engages. Now the latch is very small, and if you throw this thing open really quickly, that latch has a tendency not to engage and the canopy will bounce back on the person. So when you push it open, just make sure that the canopy latch does engage. The second or emergency way to access the cockpit in a situation is by blowing the canopy. Pretty simple, you read what it says, you grab the T-handle, you pull out 7 feet to deploy the canopy. Snap that, pull that down, grab the handle, come out about 7 feet, and you pull it. The two initiators you see the one there on the front, those are going to pop the canopy backward. Now this canopy only weighs about 45 pounds, and in most testing situations it actually came off to this side that we're on because that's where the hinge is. Now if the wind is blowing, the thing is a big wind sail. So the person that grabs that, if you do fire the canopy, once you do deploy the canopy, just keep right on going until you see where that canopy goes. This aircraft is equipped with a hydrazine restart system. This is the detector right here. It's on the right side of the aircraft, about mid-body, about halfway under the wing. If you come in, you look at it, if it's white or gray, that means the system has not fired. If you look at it, if it's dark purple or black, that means the system has fired. In that case, take whatever precautions or requirements that you're supposed to do under these circumstances. First thing you need to do once you've gained access to the cockpit, whether you've opened the canopy or whether you've blown it, is to safety the catapult. That's cutting this ballistic line. Now the ejection seat in this aircraft is 0-0, which means 0 altitude, 0 airspeed. It means a pilot could literally eject on the ground and get parachute deployment. So it's really important that we sever this cable. Now if you look down here, you're going to see a second yellow cable. It's partially covered in plastic. That one's also yellow. The book says to prevent confusion, go ahead and cut them both. Now the bottom ones, their sole purpose is to safety the initiators that would blow the canopy, but whether or not you've actually blown the canopy or not, they're both yellow, cut them both. At this point, if you have the parachute pins, you can put the drogue gun on the parachute to safety it in case it inadvertently fires. Just grab it, put it on, lock it in place. That'll safety the parachute in case it inadvertently fires. Once you've safetied the catapult, you're ready to start shutting down the aircraft. Over on the far side is the throttle. You bring the throttle aft, outboard and aft, turns off the aircraft. Just outboard of the throttle is the fuel shutoff switch. It's covered by a double guard. The top guard goes out, the one underneath it goes forward, and there's a toggle switch underneath. You follow the arrow to turn off the fuel. The last thing over there is your System 1 and System 2 oxygen switches. To turn those off, you would push the safety guard forward and then just rotate the other switch backward to the off position. That will turn off the oxygen flow to the aircraft. And just remember, by doing this with the anti-suffocation valve on the helmet, the pilot's still going to be able to breathe, so that's not something to be concerned about. The last thing we need to do to safety the aircraft is to shut down power to the entire airplane. On the right side, you're going to see a series of 7 switches, 2, 2, 2, and one in the top right-hand corner. The one at the very top is the only one you really have to concern yourself with. It's a toggle. Put it to what would be the center or neutral position, regardless what setting it's in. That will turn off power to the entire aircraft. At this point, we're ready to start egressing the pilot out of the aircraft. Okay. If you look down here on the right side, there's 2 handles down here you have to contend with. You're going to have to look and dig for those handles. A good way to do that is to find your oxygen lines which go in, follow them down. And would you lean over, please, Sarah? You look down here, and here are your 2 handles. That's a good reference. The one here in the back is the scramble handle. That's the yellow one with the black stripe with the silver disc. What you're going to want to do is you want to push down on the silver disc, at the same time pull up on the handle. It's going to come up about 3 or 4 inches. It's going to lock in place. You're going to hear a loud bang, but a lot of stuff is going to happen in a short period of time. The first thing that's going to happen is guillotines are going to fire and are going to sever the foot cables, which are right here, which are hooked to the back of the pilot's feet. Their purpose in an emergency situation is to pull the pilot's feet back and lock them in place during ejection. A guillotine is going to sever those two cables, freeing the pilot's feet. The same guillotine is going to fire and is going to sever the cable on the D-ring. Now, even though you safetied the catapult and it's not going to fire, the D-ring is still a snagging hazard for the pilot's foot. So that guillotine will sever the cable, so if the pilot snags the D-ring on the way out, it won't interfere with getting him out of the cockpit. Another thing that's going to happen is a high pressure charge of gas is going to come through this ballistic line and is going to blow the lap belt here apart, just like that. Take these shoulder harnesses, take them out of play. Take the lap belt, push them off to the side. Another thing that's going to happen is the yoke here is going to slam forward into the detented position. The important thing to remember here is don't have your hand behind it when it goes back, because it's going to lock in place and it'll trap whoever's got their hand back there. The last thing that's going to happen is the breech that houses the parachute arming cable is going to drop. It's going to free the cable. Now, as I mentioned inside, the cable is not going to come out by itself. You're going to have to reach in there, grab the cable, pull it out. Now, to keep this thing from snagging, the easiest way to do is just to grab it, tuck it in behind the pilot until you hit the parachute. That way, as you're taking the pilot out of the aircraft, it's taken out of play and your chances of snagging and deploying the parachute, whether or not you have pinned it, are greatly reduced. Now, the last thing you have to do is to actually pull the survival kit handle. It's the other yellow handle, again the yellow reference, but it's just forward of the scramble handle. Grab it, pull it back. Now, it will come off on your hand. It has to come back at a 45-degree angle. Pulling that will separate the pilot from the survival kit he's sitting on, and at this point you're ready to start egressing the pilot out of the cockpit. Now, remember, you're going to have the weight. You're going to have a 200-pound pilot, thereabouts, 30 to 40 pounds of suit. You're going to have 40 to 50 pounds of parachute. And if the pilot's unconscious, that makes it all that much tougher to get him out. How you get him out is your discretion. Whether you have people straddling this, pulling him out, you roll